Hi there, Somerr here with Stitch Sister Co. And in this video I want to show you how I make my own fabric yarn. Fabric yarn adds such a unique look to your piece, but they can be really expensive. So I thought, why don't I try to make my own? And it turned out to be really simple, so I thought I'd share. To make your own, of course, you'll need some fabric, and then there's an assortment of other supplies that you can use, but they're not necessarily required. I have a rotary cutter here, some cutting boards, a straight edge if you want something to guide your cutting, and then a pair of sharp scissors. But I will show you two methods which I use almost exclusively that only require your fabric and a pair of scissors. Before we jump in, let's talk about fabric. Now, I am not a fabric expert. I've worked with it minimally, so you may know a lot more about it than I do, but I've experimented with several different kinds and they've all worked well for me. There are three things that I would keep in mind when choosing a fabric though. The first being the thickness. If you have a really thick or stiff fabric, it's going to make it a lot harder to crochet or knit with. The second would be how the fabric handles fraying. Some fabrics will fray more on the ends than others, and depending on your taste for the project you're working on, you might not want that. Or maybe if you're going for a more rustic look, fraying may not bother you, but that's another thing to keep in mind. And then finally, you'll want to pay attention to how the fabric is printed. If it's printed on both sides, or if it's see-through and it's a little lighter on one side, all these things will affect how it looks when you work it up. It may be a good thing for it to have some variation, but that's just something to keep in mind as you're choosing your fabric. One other thing that comes into play when you're making your fabric yarn is the length of the fabric that you're working with. The longer your piece, the longer your strips will be, and if you choose to do the corner join that I'm going to show you in a minute, the fewer of those you'll have. So most of my fabric is all scraps and little bits, maybe a yard or two, so I have a lot of joins. But my project is one that I don't see the back side, so I don't see all those joins and it doesn't really affect me so much, but that's something to keep in mind also. And I've got a little tip for you. If you're someone like me who is budget conscious and likes to be thrifty, going to thrift stores and looking through their linen section where they have blankets and sheets is a really handy spot to find long pieces of fabric to work with. I used to crochet rag rugs, and this was where I would usually get my fabric. We were a single income family and had no budget for crafting, and so this was a really handy spot to find oftentimes really unique fabrics. The vintage sheets that I came across were really fun and unique to work with. So all around friendly, eco-friendly, budget-friendly, all the good things. I would buy the sheets there, bring them home, sanitize them through the wash, and they were good to go. So just a little side tip for you. Now, normally this cutting mat does not make it into videos. She's been through a lot. I accidentally set my iron down on it once, and now it has a nice little wave to it. She's not the cutest, but she will work for what we're going to use her for. I'm going to show you first probably the most correct way to cut your fabric if you want a very straight cut. For this, you're going to want to take a rotary cutter. Now obviously mine needs a new blade, and one thing I hope you get out of this video is you don't need perfect supplies to do this. Obviously my old, decrepit, dull supplies are going to do the trick, so yours will too, I promise. Now you're going to decide how thick you want your fabric based on the yarn that you are working with. I'm working with a super bulky weight yarn, so I'm going to stick to about 3/8 to a 1/2 inch thick here. Your fabric will kind of roll up on itself while you're working with it, so you might want to go a little bit wider than the type of yarn that you're working with. So I'm going to just take my rotary cutter and roll it down to make a nice straight cut, and you can even use a flat surface like a ruler of some kind to help you make sure it's straight. Now I'll go ahead and go on the record right now and say this is not the way I cut my fabric yarn. I don't use the straight edge, and I really don't even use the rotary cutter unless the fabric I'm using really requires it. But I wanted to show you this kind of more proper method first, and I also wanted to show you what I like to do down at the ends. So the longer your fabric strip you're working with, the better, because that will make longer yarn strands essentially and give you more time before you come to the end of your row like we are here. Now something I like to do, instead of cutting all the way through at the end and making separate strips that I'll have to tie on later in my work, I like to just go over the same distance that I've been cutting and start a new row going down the other way. And then it's still connected at the end, and if you want you can round out your corners. I don't even do that. I leave it as a square, and as I'm crocheting with it, it's all connected. It blends in really well, and I'll show you in a little bit what I'm talking about there. But first I want to show you how I usually 99.9% of the time how I cut my fabric yarn, and that is to start my fabric yarn, I cut a little slit, and then grabbing on both sides of the fabric, I just rip it, and I rip it down. If you pull on one side more than the other, it may cause your fabric to rip unevenly. Some fabrics rip easier than others. Some are just beauty queens at ripping down a straight line. Some, they don't like it, and you have to use the rotary cutter, and that's fine. But when this works, it is a huge time saver. I can do it from my couch. I can do it at baseball games. It's so easy. So you just start the row off with a little cut and then rip away. So the positive to this method is the time-saving element. It is very fast, and like I mentioned, you can do it most anywhere. So that makes it really handy. The downside would be that it does seem to create a little more fraying than if you were to just use the scissors or the rotary tool. But that is a trade-off that I am willing to have in most cases. Now here I'm trying it on flannel, and the flannel was not loving it. I realized after the fact I didn't try it ripping in the opposite direction, and maybe that would have made a difference if I went down the fabric the other way, but I was ripping it the length that I had of my fabric, so it did not like it. It did not rip straight, and I tried to bring it back on course here, cutting at an angle, and it just said no, it didn't want to. So I did what I could. I tried to split the fabric and cut it so that I could use it into thinner strips. I just had to give the ripping one last try, but it was clear I needed to use the rotary on this one. This green fabric was really nice. I didn't have my label for it anymore, so I'm not sure what kind of material it was, but it has some stretch to it, so it's some kind of acrylic blend, maybe some rayon in there. I'm not sure, but I was really interested to see how it would rip and work up since it had that stretch, and it did amazing. It ripped like a champ, and later I'll show you how it works up, but this is another one that is printed on one side and a little lighter on the other side, so we can see how that looks as you work it up. Okay, one last method for cutting your fabric. If you've noticed, we've gone from the most structured to now this would be the most willy-nilly way of doing it. But if you're not too particular on having a very straight edge, this is a super quick and easy way to go too. So you're gonna roll your fabric up as neatly as you can, and then take some sharp scissors. These aren't the best, but we're gonna cut off a slice, and you will have fabric strips ready to go. All right, now let's see how this works up. So you're going to use this just like you would your yarn, whether you're knitting or crocheting or using it for another project. You'll attach it in the same manner that you've been working with your yarn. This is a granny mushroom pillow, so I'm knotting it on, and then I'm going to start working some granny clusters with it. Now we're coming up to an end, and this will be for times that we didn't do that joined corner that I was showing you. We'll take a new end, hold it with the old end, I like to hold it in my fingers just to keep some tension on it while I start the next stitch with a new thread and keep going. Now we'll be able to knot those ends together and cut them short. This works especially well for projects that you don't really have to worry about the back side. This will be inside my mushroom, so I'm just going to knot them and cut them short. If you're gonna see the inside or this back side of your work, you might want to try to weave them in some way, but I just cut them and it works out nicely. Now here is the other style of end where we did the joined corner and left that boxy end there. I'm going to keep crocheting, and I'll use my finger if I need to kind of position the fabric so that the excess falls to the back side of my work. And if you'd like to, you can always cut it shorter, but it's fine for me hanging out in the back there, and I can keep going. Alright, and here we are a couple rounds later, and I am experimenting with that burgundy color fabric that I cut, where it was dark on one side and light on the other. We can see here how it's working up, kind of mixed tones in there, which is nice. This darker color is actually yarn, so I'm experimenting with doing like partial yarn, partial fabric rounds. I don't know that I love this exact look, but it's fun to experiment. I hope you guys enjoyed this quick little tutorial and feel encouraged to try making your own fabric yarn if you'd like. If you do and you share on social media, I'd love to see it. Please tag me at Stitch Sister Co. And while you guys are here, I'd appreciate it if you'd like and subscribe. Happy crocheting, friends!